Hey, good evening. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is my weekly internet show. Nice to be back with y'all. It's really been a fascinating as well as amusing controversy going on in the Republican Party. I mean, it's fascinating because it's revealing the tremendous identity crisis that these people are having, the Republicans and all the candidates and many of their supporters. Well, with the standard exception of Ron Paul. I mean, Ron Paul knows who he is, he knows what he is, and he knows his philosophy, he understands it, and he's committed to it. But the rest of these people, they have no idea what they are in life, what they're doing in life, what they believe in. They're operating under a delusion, a life of the lie. And it's so fascinating how in this crucible of politics and all the pressures of a presidential race that this dysfunction manifests itself. And of course, what I'm referring to is this latest controversy with where you've got Gingrich and Perry attacking Mitt Romney over what he did in the private sector as a venture capitalist. You know, that he was buying up companies and some would succeed and others he would sell off in separate sections and lay off all the workers. And, this is sort of the creative destructionism that the economist Schumpeter talked about. Not everyone is guaranteed success in a market economy. You've got the consumers, they are the ultimate sovereigns, the ultimate judges of which businesses are going to stay in business and which are not. And so all of a sudden you've got these two guys, Perry and Gingrich, attacking this guy. And as many of the liberals are pointing out, if you listen to some of the liberal talk shows, it's really funny. They're saying, oh, this is great. They're making our case. This is exactly why we oppose capitalism and why we oppose the free market. And because, it's vulture capitalism and so forth. Well, in the process, Mitt Romney's over there saying, oh, well, no, I'm a free enterprise kind of guy. I'm a capitalist. This is part of what capitalism's all about. Now, isn't this the guy that went to Massachusetts, became governor, and established a socialist health care system? A government-provided, a government-managed, a government-controlled health care system? I mean, if you go to Cuba, the pride and joy of Fidel Castro and every socialist in Cuba is their healthcare system. So here's a guy that says, oh, I'm a businessman in the private sector, man. I'm just buying companies and laying off people and I'm making money and this is what it's all about. But as soon as he gets into office, he establishes a socialist healthcare system. Now, he tries to get out of this by saying, well, I don't think the federal government should interfere with the states. I'm a firm believer that each state should have sovereignty. But that doesn't really address the question, though, does it? The question is, why did his particular state, let's leave the federal government out. Let's concede that the federal government has no business telling the state what kind of health care system it should have. The question still remains. Why did this man choose to establish a socialist health care system in the state in which he was presiding as governor? Now, what's fascinating about these guys is that they truly believe that they're advocates of freedom, that they're advocates of free markets, of private property, of limited government. But if you go to the real crux of what's going on here, at least with respect to this particular controversy, what is it about? Well, it's about this business of which candidate is going to be better able to create jobs, right? This is the most ludicrous thing I've ever seen. But they're all battling on who's a better job creator, and whoever's the best job creator should be elected president. Have you ever seen anything so inane? It's like they're running for job creator in chief. And Perry's over there saying, well, I'm a big job creator in Texas because when I'm governor, wow, all these jobs come into existence and I'm responsible, It's sort of like, the fly that sits on the chariot wheel and the chariot's going really fast. And boy, that fly is absolutely convinced that he's making that wheel turn. Or, when the rooster crows every morning, boy, that rooster's absolutely convinced that his crowing's bringing up the sun every morning. Well, and so you've got Romney saying, "Well, look, I created a net 100,000 jobs in the private sector when I was president of Bain Capital, and this shows you that if you elect me president, I'm going to be a job creator." This is so ludicrous. Now, y'all know that have been listening to this show for quite some time. You know that I've always emphasized one important question that every person in this country ought to be asking. And here's the question. What is the role of government in a free society? Okay? I mean, that's the critical question here. Because, you've got these people that say, well, we're going to cut spending across the board, 10% or 20%. Boy, that's going to solve this out-of-control spending and debt and the bankruptcy that this country is headed toward. But notice they're not asking that question, what should be the role of government in a free society? So if they cut everything 10%, it leaves all the departments and all the agencies, ready to pounce at the first sign that, boy, they can raise taxes again and get their budgets back up again. Well, if you ask, what is the role of government in a free society? Then you start talking not so much in terms of across the board cuts. You start talking in terms of abolishing agencies and departments that don't fulfill a legitimate function in a free society. And then you're talking about saving all the tax monies that go into funding those departments and agencies and the laws that they enforce. I mean, the classic example, of course, is drug laws. Are drug laws consistent with the principles of freedom? Is it the role of government in a free society to barge into somebody's house with a SWAT team, cart them out because they happen to possess some drugs in the house, and take them away to a judge and get bail set and make them get a lawyer and then prosecute them to the hilt and then send them away to 20 years in the penitentiary, all because they were sitting in the privacy of their own home possessing a quantity of drugs? Well, libertarians, it's a no-brainer for us. I mean, as everybody knows, that is not the role of government in a free society. So, we don't just talk about a 10% cut in the budget of the DEA. We say there should be no DEA any more than there should have been, an alcoholic, bureau, the Al Capone type thing back in the 20s. That's not a legitimate role of government. So you abolish the DEA, you abolish all the laws that criminalize the possession of drugs. So, that means, layoffs of clerks and judges and prosecutors and so forth. But that's not a bad thing because these are all government officials that are living off of the money that's taken out of the private sector through taxes. And so by laying off these people in the public sector, it's a doubly positive effect because now the people in the private sector that were having their money taken away to fund the DEA and so forth, they now get to keep that money. All right? I mean, and that means investing in their own business, saving, which is then used by banks to lend out to businesses. I mean, this is private wealth. But then those that had been in the public sector, they're now in the private sector too. They're now producers. With the extra money that people have now in the private sector that previously were having it taken away, they can go over there and let's say, hey, I'm going to buy a car. I'm going to go on vacation. Hey, I'm going to get a stereo system. Well, that produces demand for those sectors that then are able to hire the people that had previously been in the public sector, doing these ridiculous SWAT team deals and so forth. That they're now in the private sector too, and they're producing. So you have a doubly positive effect when you're laying off people in the public sector, putting them in the private sector. This is why, after wars, people said, oh, you can't lay off all the troops. You can't lay off all the troops. Think of the unemployment. Nonsense. That was the key to prosperity. You lay off the troops, that lifts the tax burden from the private sector because they're having to pay for all those troops. And the troops are not productive. They're just sitting over there doing left face, right face, sitting around in barracks. There's no war, twiddling their thumbs. But all of a sudden, you lay them off. You leave the money in the private sector that previously was being used to fund those soldiers, and now all that money is creating demand in certain sectors of the economy, the automobile sector, the clothing sector, the entertainment sector. That then propels those sectors to say, hey, we need help. The help wanted signs start going out. The previous soldiers now go out and seek employment, and they're producing. So they're now part of the productive class instead of the recipient welfare warfare class. Well, getting back to what we're talking about then, government is not a creator of jobs. I mean, these guys are running for, job creator in chief. I know how to create jobs. I know how to create jobs. They can't create anything. Government is the great destroyer of jobs. Because as this welfare warfare state continues getting bigger and bigger and larger, more and more money must be taken out of the private sector to fund it. And so that's what these guys don't understand, that it's not a problem of getting a better job creator in office. It's a structural problem, that you've got a structure in place that leaves a public sector so large that the private sector is now teetering. It can't handle this tremendous burden over here. And this is what these candidates, well, except for Ron Paul, they can't understand. They can't acknowledge that this isn't just getting a better manager as president, a better businessman as president, a better job creator as president. This involves a structural change, a paradigm shift. Now, what we're talking about, of course, is the welfare warfare state. The whole idea of government being used to take money from one group of people and give it to another group of people, or that government should serve as a worldwide policeman, as an empire, 1,000 bases in 130 countries, invading countries, starting wars, sanctioning countries, provoking people, getting people angry, killing people, torturing them, kidnapping them. Is that the role of government in a free society? And of course, we libertarians say, no, that's not a role of government in a free society. And so we would dismantle those things, bring all those troops home, close all those bases, start with Guantanamo. I mean, what in the world does the U.S. government have having a base in Cuba? I mean, it is so ludicrous. It is so outrageous. I mean, imagine if, during the Spanish-American War, the Cubans have said, we demand a base, a permanent base in Miami. And so all of a sudden you have this little enclave in Miami for, 100 and some odd years, 200 years or so, where you got, Cuban troops at their base in, outside Miami and landing there and stocking it. And I mean, Americans would say, what in the world do we, what's the point of having Cubans have a base here? Well, that's the same question we have to ask ourselves. What in the world does the United States, what business does it have having a military base in Cuba? Well, of course, it's all a result of the Spanish-American War. The government, the U.S. government goes in and says, hey, we're here to liberate you from the Spanish Empire. But it wasn't any liberation at all, because as soon as the war was over, the U.S. government took the position, now you belong to us. Now you must do what we say. And the Cubans said, wait a minute, no, we want independence. And then the American government said, well, that's not what this was about. It was not about your independence. It's about our control over you rather than the Spanish control. And that's how they got Guantanamo Bay. They extracted it from their little puppet government that they installed, that the U.S. government would have this base in perpetuity. They also, in this little agreement that they made with this puppet regime, said, we can come in and intervene whenever we want to install a pro-U.S. regime. Well, again, is this the role of government in a free society, to have these imperial bases overseas? I mean, they may make people feel good. Hey, man, wow, I'm a powerful person because my government's got bases in Cuba and elsewhere in Africa and Korea and South America and so forth. This is not the role of government in a free society. So libertarians would bring all the troops home, discharge them, dismantle the empire, and imagine how much money that would save. I mean, you're talking about real fiscal responsibility. But that's not what these Republican candidates do, or their supporters. I mean, I'm talking about standard mainstream Republicans. They sit there and they say, "Oh, but Jacob, it is the role of government to create jobs. That's the role of government in our society." Now, if you go to Cuba, okay, I mean, if you want full employment, go to Cuba. The government there is a job creator. You see that everybody has a job in Cuba. Uh, oh, did I mention that everybody works for the government? Yeah. I mean, it's like, I don't know, 99%, 98% or something. And oh, did I mention that they're desperately poor? That they're verging on starvation in Cuba? Oh, it's no different in North Korea. Everybody works for the government. Imagine that. Imagine if you were working for the government and all your friends and all your neighbors. And I mean, it's a weird system. I've been to Cuba. You know, it was so weird walking down the streets of Havana because, you know, we walk down the streets here in the U.S. and, you know, there's stores everywhere. You know, there's a little pharmacy here and a little boutique here and a clothing store here and a, you know, grocery store here. And you walk down the street in Havana, everywhere you look, both sides of the street, everything's owned by the government. I mean, it's quite incredible. Now, they've liberalized of late. You know, like they got hotels that are like 50-50 owned. They bring in some European entrepreneurs to run the hotels and so forth because, you know, they know that socialism doesn't work, and so they're trying to figure out what to do about it. Recently, somebody suggested that they were going to lay off 100,000 workers. Well, it'd be the greatest thing in the world. But immediately the statists said, "Oh, unemployment, unemployment." And I'm sure there were statists here saying the same thing. "Oh, you can't do that. That's going to cause unemployment." Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, again, what you're talking about is all these people in the public sector that are living off the tiny sliver of people in the private sector, or more likely, you know, when the Soviet Union was sending money into Cuba, they get external support. So here are these Republicans saying, "Oh, yes, Jacob, the role of government is to create jobs, just like in Cuba and just like in North Korea. You know, they got to hire people and have public works projects and train people for jobs and all this." At the same time, they're calling themselves advocates of the free market, advocates of capitalism. This is their identity crisis. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they are. But you know what they are? And this is, of course, where libertarians come in. And this is why they resent us. Let me tell you what they are. They're socialists. Okay? I mean, they don't like hearing that. You can go on any radio, you know, talk show, Sirius XM and stuff, where some of these conservatives are talking, or on television. Go to any of the networks where there's conservative talk shows, and they will talk about free enterprise, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. They will say, "I'm free enterprise. I'm a free market kind of guy. I believe in the Chamber of Commerce." And then they'll say, "Obama's a socialist. Obama's a socialist." You can hear this when people call into these talk shows, say, "You know, we've got to get Romney in because Obama's a socialist." Well, let's take the three largest socialist programs in the country. Okay, we've got Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, you couldn't get much bigger in terms of federal socialism than those three projects. Now, why are they socialist? Well, because they're based on this idea of using the government to take from one group of people and give it to another group. I mean, this is what Marx said, you know, from each according to ability to each according to need. Now, I'm not suggesting that these people want to nationalize everything, that they want to put everything like in Cuba under the control of the government. What I'm talking about is socialist programs. And Social Security is an absolute model of a socialist program. It was brought into existence by Franklin Roosevelt, a liberal. He got the idea from Otto von Bismarck of Germany, not any of America's founding fathers. They wouldn't have had anything to do with that junk. And Bismarck, who was called the Iron Chancellor of Germany, he got the idea from the German socialists. You know, they had a small socialist movement in Germany. He got the idea of Social Security from them. And then Roosevelt gets the idea. And so they embrace this idea of socialism during the crisis of the Great Depression. It becomes a permanent program, not just a temporary emergency program, a permanent program. And you've got, you know, Medicare and Medicaid also comes from the German socialists. Lyndon Johnson, a liberal, and his icon was Franklin Roosevelt. His mentor was Franklin Roosevelt. So he says, "I'm going to take this one step further." He's going to get Medicare and Medicaid in there. And so you've got this whole system of where you got money taken from one group of people, the young and the productive, and given it to another group of people, the elderly and the poor, and of course, there's this delusion that, oh, there's a fund, Jacob, there's a fund, a Social Security trust fund. What garbage. I mean, that's just delusionary. There's no fund. As they collect the tax money, they spend them. And now they put IOUs, but what difference does that make? That doesn't affect anything. If I have, for example, in my home safe, $20,000 for, some kid's college education, and I take it out and go buy a stereo system with it, and I put an IOU in there, a promissory note, and the kid says, hey, how's that college fund? And I say, oh, it's all funded, it's got a promissory note in there. It's ridiculous, okay? There is no fund. This is a straight socialist program. All three of them are, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. When was the last time that you saw a Republican, a conservative, calling for the repeal of these socialist programs? I would say never. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to see Romney. You're not going to see Perry. You're not going to see any of these people. The only one you might see is Ron Paul, where he's talking about, young people ought to have a chance to opt out of Social Security, and he talks about what life was like before Medicare and Medicaid, where doctors provided free health care to the poor, and you had a free market system, the best health care system in the entire world before you got Medicare and Medicaid involved, and that screwed everything up. But the most these people will do, the statists, the socialists, the Republican socialists, is say, oh, repeal Obamacare, repeal Obamacare. Well, okay, that's all fine and good, but where does that leave you? It still leaves you with a tremendous healthcare crisis that's caused by government intervention in healthcare. Medicare and Medicaid, occupational licensure, medical licensure. I mean, and if you say to a Republican, a Romney or a Perry or a Gingrich or a Santorum, are you ready to repeal these programs today in order to restore a free market? They will say, oh my gosh, no. We need these programs. These programs are part of America. I mean, the poor would die in the streets, and the elderly would be, starving to death because their kids would never take care of them. We live in a country where children would never take care of their parents and wouldn't take care of their own retirement and wouldn't handle their own health care and buy insurance. Oh, no, man, you've got to have government forcing this thing. And these people call themselves free enterprise. Now, this is why they resent us libertarians so much. This is why they were trying to marginalize Ron Paul. Where they say, oh, don't, give him 2 minutes during an hour-and-a-half debate. Don't give him much publicity. Well, because they don't want to be confronted with this reality. You see, imagine if there was no libertarians in life. I mean, just nothing but liberals and conservatives. Well, then they could get away with their charade. The conservatives were saying, we're free enterprise, we're the right wing, we're free enterprise, we're for free markets, and we hate socialism, and Obama's a socialist. Well, then the liberals would say, we're not socialists, we just believe in programs that help the poor, and Obama says, I'm not a socialist, I'm a capitalist too. And so you got this game going back and forth, but all of a sudden pops up a libertarian. And a libertarian says, no, wait a minute, I oppose all these socialist programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, because they are socialist. They are immoral. They're destructive. They tear the fiber out of society. They destroy people's sense of independence and moral fiber and responsibility and compassion and charity and caring. You got to ditch these things. And all of a sudden the young people sit there and say, wait a minute. All my public school teachers have told me that America's a free enterprise system, that we've got a free market economy. I've learned that since the first grade. They emphasize that every time I made the Pledge of Allegiance, they told me what a free country, that I ought to be grateful because I live in a free country, and the troops are invading other countries to protect my rights and freedoms. And all of a sudden these libertarians are saying, they oppose all these things, but yet the libertarians are saying they're pro-free market, pro-free enterprise, and defining enterprise as free of government intervention, government control. Young people say, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so they ask their statist parents and their statist adult friends, who's the free enterprise here? The libertarians are opposing all you guys' programs, and they're saying they're free enterprise. And the adult statists say, don't listen to the libertarians. They're loony, they're wacko, they're crazy. Don't pay any attention to them. Please, please, please don't read what they're saying. But it hasn't worked. I mean, you can see the results in terms of the Ron Paul campaign, where there's a lot of people that have broken through to libertarianism, and they're saying, wait a minute, it's you guys, the Republicans and the Democrats, that are living the life of the lie. It's you guys that can't confront reality here. Y'all are all socialists. You're all imperialists. You've got this foreign empire that you love so much. You want the government to rule the world and police the world and all these bases. This is what imperialism is all about. This is what the Soviet Empire was about, the British Empire. But the Republicans and the Democrats now are then relegated to saying, but this is a good way of life. Socialism is good. Imperialism is good. All right, fine. Now we've got the debate. Okay, now we've got a real debate. What's better, freedom and free markets and a constitutionally limited republic, or socialism, imperialism, fascism, interventionism? I mean, we could all just lump it in one great big pile of statism. Which one is better? Now we've got a meaningful debate, and this is why I've been saying for years, the real fight in this country is not between left and right, because they're the same thing. They believe in socialism, interventionism. They think government should be creating jobs. They believe in welfare and government schooling and farm subsidies and corporate bailouts and foreign aid to dictatorships and others, and all this huge transfer society that's, of course, funded by the Internal Revenue Service and all the scary things they do to people to make sure they keep sending that pile of money to Washington. You've got the Federal Reserve that prints the money to cover the difference, debasing the monetary system. I mean, there's another example. The Federal Reserve is just a system of central planning. I mean, you've heard of that, socialist central planning. I mean, we remember that in the old Soviet Union days where the government was centrally planning the economy. Well, the Federal Reserve is nothing but a central planner of monetary phenomena. I mean, they're planning the monetary decisions of hundreds of millions of people. No wonder there's crises. No wonder there's recessions and depressions and deflation and inflation and all this chaos. It's what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. That's their system. And so what we libertarians are bringing into this thing, and it's very exciting because we can see now what's manifesting itself in the Paul campaign. There's a lot of people that have broken through, and they're realizing that, what statism is and what genuine freedom is and what economic liberty is. And it's not a life of delusion. It's not a life of the lie. It's not a life that embraces socialist programs and convinces yourself that, it's really free enterprise. It's socialism. It's fascism, government business partnerships, something that all these Republicans and Democrats, Ron Paul accepted, believe in. So we libertarians, we are making some gigantic strides here, because it's obvious that people are, quote, waking up, breaking through, whatever figure of speech you want to use. They're figuring things out, and that's exciting. Now, I ought to tell you in my last couple of minutes here that we've got this exciting Civil Liberties College tour coming up. Go to our website at fff.org, click on FFF email update, and you can see the banner at the top of today's email update. I mean, this thing's going to be fantastic. We're doing it in partnership with this great organization, the Young Americans for Freedom. They've put together the tour for us. We're going to Columbia University in New York City. We're going to Indiana University in Purdue. We're going to Middle Tennessee State University, and then we're wrapping up at Ohio State University. We got Glenn Greenwald, one of the I would say probably the foremost defender of civil liberties in the liberal community. Forbes magazine named him one of the top 25 most influential liberals. He blogs at salon.com. He's a constitutional lawyer. We've got a conservative, Bruce Fine, one of the most knowledgeable, eloquent, erudite defenders of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and due process of law, and opponents of this war on terrorism that you'd ever find. And then I'm going to be bringing the libertarian perspective, including with my law background. And I practiced law for some 12 years before I joined the libertarian movement. And especially in today's times, where you've got this military detention bill that's now been enacted that codifies, this enemy combatant doctrine, military roundup of Americans, incarceration without trial, torture. I mean, it's incredible. So we've got the welfare state and the warfare state all squeezing the lifeblood out of the American people. And, well, this tour is going to be devoted to the warfare state and how the warfare state is used as a way to suppress people's civil liberties at home. Not only here. I mean, you can go to Egypt where the military dictatorship does it there. You can go to any totalitarian regime and see it. You can go see it in China. But what's amazing is that we're seeing it in this country. So take a look at that. If you're in the area, around these universities, it's open to the public. It's free. And so we'd love to have you. In fact, I think it'd be great if you all were there interacting with these students, because we're going to be attracting students across the political spectrum, liberals, conservatives, independents, libertarians. It's going to be really exciting. So we'd love to have you join us. So that's the show for this week. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.